Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here with my African nightcrawlers, preparing to give them a feeding after 10 days since the most recent check-in. That last check-in was their 15th feeding, and it was at that time we made the decision with these little guys to sort of transition their diet, if you will. I use that word right here in terms of the diet, because, there's always that choice of what type of foods to give them, what types of bedding to give them, if there's a choice. And in the case of these systems, they're actually so basically every other system that I have that's older than these guys has already transitioned to what I refer to as foraging. So these guys can still get bedding with their feeding as far as I'm concerned. But once I transition a system to foraging, I'll still feed them, but then I'll be withholding bedding. So I thought this was all Brussels sprout leaves, but there's some potato peel in here too. I do remember this potato peel was a little bit wet. It was peeled off potatoes that had already been cooked, so it was a little bit wet, and it freezes together pretty good this way. So let's see if I could break that apart. This is going to be their meal. I'm assuming that stuff like this is going to go pretty quick. The potato peels might take a little bit longer. They'll nibble away what potato still is stuck to the peel, and then the peel itself will go eventually here. Just a little bit too much extra rice got prepared the other day. Didn't all get eaten, and it's getting old now, so it's time to just do away with it. I've got coffee. I've got my grit here, pulverized eggshell, and this is some flour that I used to bread some fried meat the other day, and it didn't all get used. So I figured that could just go in there as part of their meal today too. So let's get to feeding these little guys. Oh yeah, well, as long as we're showing stuff off, this is the prepared bedding. It's shredded paper cardboard combined with leaves with a lot of moisture applied to it, and just sits around so all that stuff has a chance to really get nice and soft and tender and easy to eat. So on the green board I use the expression easy to eat or fast. I think in the last video I used the idea of soft, soft bedding being used versus bedding that might have a lot of hard bits and pieces to it, like I guess leaves is what I'm thinking of in terms of a type of bedding that does with it bring a bit of tough material, slow composting material in the form of the leaves, stems. So like here's an example of a leaf stem. So by having made the decision that we're not going to be using that sort of bedding from this point forward, we're going to just use stuff that's going to be easy to break down. We're just going to be helping the system's material become a little bit more fine, when it finally gets to the point where we're ready to start steering them towards harvest and relocating the worms and stuff like that. But these little guys are still active systems. They're going to get bedding with their feeding. I wondered about these cherry tomatoes we fed last time. I did sort of think to myself that if they're all just going to be sitting here uneaten, then it would be a good idea for me to burst them. So maybe my excavation of the feeding zone should just be like a really rough, I don't know if that's a good idea, because now I feel like I'm squeezing a bunch of little wormies. They probably came out, for whatever else that was fed along with the tomatoes. I believe it was radish leaves. A whole bunch of radish leaf was mixed in on top of the cherry tomatoes. And then after I got done editing the video and watching it and thinking to myself about how I gave these tomatoes to these little guys, I figured, you know what? Here's another example of what I've been referring to lately as like a little food time capsule. Just sitting there waiting for the worms to be able to make use of it, but inaccessible as a food item because it's not been breached. Its protective skin is something that the worms just aren't going to go through if it's not decomposing on its own or whatever. So all you need is a slight little opening. Any sort of tear or break is adequate. I made the same mistake with banana in a recent feeding too, and during the last check-in the banana just needed to be burst. But over that interval of time that passed between the two feedings, that banana just sat there with worms just passing it by. Never never really sensing it as a food item. You know, it's pretty interesting. I did have to tear up a napkin. One of these napkins that we used as bedding last time. I encountered this big chunk of material that I figured you might be better off segmented into smaller fragments. But I thought there were 3 napkins used in here. So maybe there's certain napkins that the worms favor over others in terms of the type of wood pulp used to make the paper, or how fine or how coarse or whatever it is. Because it does seem like, I guess my point is I was expecting to find a lot of leftover leafy, napkin. I was expecting to find a lot of leftover napkin down here in these bins as part of excavating the feeding zone, but surprisingly very little of it was there. So you might have noticed I was actively bursting every cherry tomato I encountered along the way, but I've been doing it in a way that I prevent tomato squirt ending up all over me. So I've been just doing them off on the side. I believe we've just encountered a corncob sphere. Just a little fun thing going on here where we threw these pieces of corncob into the bins. I believe that's what we're encountering here. Over here in bin number 2, I do believe we had regularly bumped into at least 2 or 3 of those corncob spheres during most check-ins. But we never really go out of our way too much to try to hunt them all down to see if they're all still here. I don't remember bumping into anything like that over in bin number 1. Guess what? I just found a second one. I believe as recently as just a couple check-ins ago, we were regularly encountering 2, 3 of those corncob spheres over here in bin number 2. For whatever reason, we've just not been seeing as many of them in bin number 1. Whether they're even still there anymore, I guess, comes into question. Have I just, in my rough handling of things, managed to destroy them and pulverize them with my rough handling? Could be. Could very well be. Alright. I guess what was going through my mind here was just how castings rich this material is and how little bedding there is. I mean, you really do have to kind of look. There's a little fragment of what might be a piece of a leaf right there. Not too much of anything that resembles my shredded, prepared bedding. A good few chunks of the napkin that was used last time. But you might also notice that I'm kind of attempting to open up the size of the feeding zone here a little bit, because I do feel we should be pretty generous with bedding today. I didn't bring any of my napkins that I'm trying to do away with. I kind of went through this real active phase where I was using them in every single feeding religiously. But I guess I must have taken the amount of them down to the point where I don't feel like I'm in overstock mode anymore. So this stuff is definitely a lot more damp than bedding I usually use. Let's see if we could break it apart over here a little bit. And since everything is going to be kind of small particle matter, like all this rice here, let's see if we could use gravity to our advantage to get this delivered into the systems quickly and easily. Where's the flour? The flour is what I thought would be something that would be able to blend in with surrounding materials, and just get scooped up by the worms as they cruise back and forth through the worm bin. This is just something that if I allow it to remain sort of in a big pile, it feels like it's just going to turn into a little mound of plaster of Paris, which maybe the worms can make use of, but just feels like if stuff is spread around, blended together, it all just has a slightly better chance of getting consumed versus it being like in a pile or a mound or clumped together. So, let's not forget we've got a little bit of veggie matter here too, so all the tiny particle matter has all gone in for the most part. We'll throw some grit into at the end, a little bit of pulverized eggshell to accompany their feeding. you know, this chunk of potato. A little bit contrary to what I was saying before, trying to, you know, kind of fragment things versus letting them remain in a pile. But if stuff is so frozen together, then I'm not going to take the time to fiddle with it too much. So 2 corn cob spheres in bin number 2. I believe that's in line with what we've seen lately. Perhaps we'll just get lucky over in bin number 1 and spot a corn cob sphere while we're covering things up here. Oops, okay. That one seemed to me like it had a lot of potential to possibly squirt me. Because I didn't really submerge it or get it out of the line of fire, where it could have thrown all kinds of juice my way. So here we'll just very casually bring in material from the outer edges to get our feeding zone neatly covered up. We get to aerate and inspect at the same time, and perhaps we'll even encounter a slightly larger object. Perhaps we'll find one of our corn cob spheres over here in bin number 1 in the process. But as you can see, I'm not going out of my way to make that happen. If we find one, we find one. Yeah, lots of castings piling up everywhere. I'm glad to see that the moisture level in both bins is really nice. The bubble wrap's doing a fine job keeping the moisture in, not letting it evaporate away. So I think that's that. You know, I did actually think to myself how nice it would have been to be a little bit more generous with the bedding. Perhaps I should have been more generous, but I sort of forgot. I thought we would blend in all those fine particle size foods, throw in the veggie matter. I don't even know, did we even apply grit? We may not have. But whatever. There's no exact science to worm farming, that's for sure. If you miss a step, guess what? You make up for it next time. So that was a fun little check-in with the African nightcrawlers, doing really nice in here. And I think maybe in another 12 days, maybe when these suckers reach 200 days of age, maybe we'll have a good reason to come back here and check in on them again. So let me see if I can leave some of this stuff here. Look at that, I try so hard to keep my clean hand clean, and then there I go messing it up at the end. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.